At 2:13 in the morning, Daniel Okafor reached into his wife's purse. His hand wasn't even steady. He told himself it was the car keys. He told himself he wasn't that kind of man. He told himself 22 years of marriage meant something, and that something was trust, and trust meant you didn't dig through your wife's bag at 2 in the morning like a detective in a bad movie. He told himself all of that, and then he kept going. 3 minutes later, he was sitting on the cold bathroom tile with his back against the bathtub, holding a piece of paper that made every single year of his life feel like a lie someone else had written. Now, before we go any further, let me ask you something. Have you ever trusted a person so completely that you handed them your whole life? Not just your money, not just your time, your whole life, your mornings, your sacrifices, your name, your love. That's what Daniel did, and this is what it cost him. Daniel Okafor was not born into ease. He grew up in 3rd Ward, Houston, the kind of neighborhood where ambition either hardens you or buries you, and Daniel decided early on that he would not be buried. His father, Emeka, came to Texas from Enugu, Nigeria with $30, a suitcase, and a determination that bordered on the unreasonable. He sold insurance door to door. He learned English by reading newspapers out loud at the kitchen table. He told his children, Daniel, his older sister Dees, and younger brother Kwame, that the only things in this world that couldn't be taken from you were your character and your skills. Daniel held on to that. By his early 30s, he owned a mid-sized construction company called Okafor Built. No flashy logo on a billboard. No Instagram profile with motivational quotes. Just heavy equipment. A crew of 32 workers who trusted him, and a man who showed up before sunrise and didn't leave a site until the last beam was checked. He married Angela Whitmore at 29 years old. She was sharp, polished, the kind of woman who walked into a room and immediately understood the power dynamics inside it. She had a gift for numbers, managed the accounts for a dental practice on Westheimer, could quote mortgage rates from memory, talked about investment portfolios the way most people talk about the weather. Daniel thought he'd found a partner. He thought they were building something together. He was half right. They had 3 children, or so Daniel believed. Brianna, 20, pre-law at the University of Houston. Serious, driven, the daughter who called home every Sunday without being asked. Kofi, 15, 6 feet already and still growing, obsessed with basketball, built like Daniel. Same broad jaw, same wide forehead, same heavy brow that made him look older than his age. And Michael, 17 years old, quiet, composed, the kind of student whose teachers always said, he listens more than he talks, and that makes him dangerous in the best way. Michael had Angela's narrow nose and a set of eyes that sat differently from everyone else in the family, lighter, more guarded. Daniel had noticed once years ago, and then dismissed it the way a man dismisses a thought that would cost too much to follow. Because Daniel loved Michael the way a man loves a child he waited his whole life to raise properly. He taught him to ride a bike in a Home Depot parking lot on a Saturday morning when Michael was 5, both of them laughing until their sides cramped. He sat in the hospital all night when Michael was 8 and spiked a fever that wouldn't quit. He drove to every science fair, every debate tournament, every college prep seminar, not because Angela asked him to, but because he genuinely wanted to be there. He was not a flawless man, but he was a fully present father. Hold on to that. It becomes the most important sentence in this entire story. Now, the year before everything broke open, Angela changed. Not suddenly, not in a way you could point to and say, there, that's the moment. It happened the way seasons shift in Houston. Gradual, humid, disorienting. One day you realize it's cold, and you never felt it getting there. She started carrying her phone face down everywhere. She moved calls to the garage with the door shut. She began taking her purse to rooms she'd never taken before. The bathroom, the kitchen, upstairs to fold laundry. She guarded that bag the way banks guard vaults. Daniel asked her once, casual, "You okay, Ong?" She looked at him with a particular expression that beautiful women sometimes deploy when they want a man to feel foolish for having a working brain. "I'm fine, Daniel. Why do you always have to make things weird?" He didn't ask again. "You ever done that?" Swallowed a question, Because you already sensed the answer would cost more than you were ready to pay? Yeah, that's exactly what Daniel did. Every single day. For almost a full year. The night it happened, Angela fell asleep on the living room couch. HGTV was on some show about couples renovating houses, which is honestly a little funny in retrospect. A half-eaten bowl of popcorn sat cooling on the coffee table. Her purse was on the floor beside her, and the class she always snapped shut, was open. Daniel walked past it on his way to the kitchen. He stopped. He looked at her, the slow rise and fall of her chest, the small silver hoop catching the light from the television, her hand resting open beside her like she'd finally let her guard down. Don't, he thought. You trust this woman. 22 years. He crouched down, slowly, like a man approaching something that might startle. He reached in, under her wallet, beneath a compact mirror and a folded receipt. His fingers found a thick manila envelope. No name on the front. No label. Just paper, dense and formal, the way important documents always feel. He carried it to the bathroom, locked the door, sat on the edge of the tub. First document, bank statements. Not their joint account. A separate account, Angela's name alone, going back 15 years. Monthly deposits. Consistent. Arriving like clockwork around the same time that their rent payment cleared every month. Daniel frowned. He turned the page. The deposits matched their rent amount almost exactly. He set that down. Second document. A property ownership certificate. One address. Pearland, Texas, a residential neighborhood just south of Houston. He stared at the address. He read it a second time. He got up, found his glasses on the bathroom counter, sat back down, and read it a third time. Angela Okafor, owner of record. 15 years. The address was their home. Here's the thing about shock. Real shock, not movie shock, where a person gasps and clutches their chest. Real shock is quieter. It sits inside your ribcage like a stone dropped into still water. You barely see it go in, but the ripples don't stop. Daniel sat very still. The house he'd been paying rent on for 15 years. The house he'd repainted twice and fixed the back fence on, and argued with Angela about upgrading the kitchen in. His house. Angela's property. He was trying to build the math in his head. 15 years of rent payments. The two increases Angela had shrugged off with, "That's just a market, baby." Every check, every automatic payment, going to his wife. He was a tenant in his own home. The envelope slipped. A third document slid out and landed face up on the tile. Smaller than the others. Folded. Clinical. A printed table with columns of numbers and a dense paragraph of medical language that he had to read word by word, slowly, holding the paper close. DNA paternity analysis. Child Michael O. Alleged father Daniel Okafor. Probability of paternity 0%. The bathroom was the quietest place on earth. Daniel sat there for a long time. He didn't scream. He didn't break anything. He didn't cry, not yet. He just held the paper in both hands and breathed. 22 years. A DNA test that had already been done. Already been read by someone. Already been filed away in a purse and carried around, apparently, until the night of class didn't click shut. Michael was 17 years old. Someone had known since before his first birthday. Daniel set the paper down on the tile. He placed the bank statements on top of it, the ownership certificate on top of those. He looked at the stack for a moment, then started folding everything back up, piece by piece, the way you fold something you're not ready to put down, but have no choice but to handle. He put everything back in the envelope. He walked out of the bathroom. He replaced the purse on the floor exactly as he found it, this time with the clasp shut. He stood in the dark kitchen for 20 minutes. Then he walked upstairs. He stopped outside Kofi's room, heard the soft sound of his son's breathing, and kept moving. He stood in the hallway outside Michael's door. He put one hand flat against the wood. He stood there a long time. At 6 a.m., Angela came into the kitchen, stretched, tied her robe, and started the coffee maker. She walked past Daniel on her way to check her phone and kissed him on the cheek. "Morning," she said, already distracted. Daniel said nothing. She didn't notice. And that right there is the detail that tells you more than anything else in this story. Not the DNA report. Not the property documents. The fact that she kissed him on the cheek and didn't notice the silence. Because a woman who still loved her husband would have felt that silence immediately. She'd stopped paying attention to him a long time ago. He went to work. He managed 2 active construction sites that day. He took meetings. He signed off on a materials order and handled a dispute between 2 crew members without raising his voice. He drove home, sat through dinner, helped Kofi work through a geometry problem, and went to bed at his regular time. To anyone watching, nothing had changed. Inside, Daniel was doing something that most people in his position don't have the discipline to do. He was thinking, not reacting. Thinking. He grew up on construction sites. He understood foundations. He understood that when a building is structurally compromised, the worst thing you can do is start swinging a hammer. You have to survey the damage first. You have to understand exactly what you're dealing with before you touch anything. He was going to understand exactly what he was dealing with. Within 1 week, Daniel had hired 2 people. Portia Calloway, family law attorney, 18 years of practice, operated out an office in Midtown Houston with the quiet authority of someone who had seen every flavor of marital disaster and was never surprised by any of them. And Thad Burrell, private investigator, retired Harris County detective, small office near Greenway Plaza, flat fee, no nonsense. The kind of man who found things people thought were unfindable. In his first meeting with Portia, Daniel placed the envelope on her desk and pushed it across to her. She opened it. Read everything. Sat down. Picked up her pen. Do not confront your wife, she said without looking up. Do not change your behavior. Do not move money, cancel accounts, or alter any financial structures. Do not tell anyone. Not your brother, not your friends, not your pastor. And Michael? Daniel said. Portia looked up then. Especially not Michael. Not yet. Daniel nodded once. Let me work, Portia said. Thad's first report came back in 10 days. Daniel read it in his truck, parked in the lot of a Whataburger on Kirby Drive at 9 p.m., engine running. Untouched food going cold on the passenger seat. Angela Okafor did not own 1 property. She owned 5. Their home in Pearland, a duplex in 3rd Ward, the same neighborhood where Daniel grew up, which had a particular kind of cruelty to it. A single-family rental in Missouri City, a commercial space in Midtown, and a 4-unit apartment complex in Galveston, fully tenanted, generating income every single month. Every single property had been purchased within the past 15 years. Every single one had been funded, fully or significantly, with money that Daniel had given Angela to invest in their future. He remembered those conversations with a clarity that landed like a punch. If anything happens to me, property protects us. It's the one thing that keeps its value. He'd said that. He believed it. He'd handed her the capital and stood back proudly while she put to work. Or so he thought. He remembered telling his brother Kwame, Ong is a smart one with money. I just build things. He built the empire. She put her name on it. There was more. Angela had formed a property management LLC, filed quietly in Texas under a name with no connection to either of them. She ran the rental income through that company and deposited it into the private account he'd found on those statements. For 15 years, every time Daniel authorized a monthly rent payment on their own home, that money traveled in a clean, invisible arc directly into his wife's private business account. She had kept the rent slightly below market rate, not low enough to raise questions, not high enough to cause complaints, just comfortable enough that he never thought twice. That's not carelessness. That's architecture. Someone built that system the same way Daniel built foundations, deliberately, carefully, with a long game in mind. And then the detail that moved from grief into something colder. Thad found a name. Victor Reeves, 44 years old, originally from Dallas, currently living in the Montrose neighborhood in Houston, 20 minutes from their house. Victor and Angela had maintained contact for 17 years. Not a brief affair. Not a one-time mistake. 17 years of communication, managed carefully through a second email account that Angela accessed on a tablet she kept hidden in the back of her home office closet. The DNA test had been completed 16 years ago. When Michael was about 12 months old, Angela had ordered it herself. Victor's name was on the results as a confirmed biological match. She knew before Michael could walk. Victor knew too. And for 16 years, both of them had watched Daniel raise that boy. Both of them had sat across from a man pouring himself into a child, knowing every drop of it was built on a lie they'd agreed to keep. Michael had been acting differently for weeks. Not dramatically. Not the kind of differently that announces itself. Just shorter sentences. More reasons to leave the room. A particular discomfort whenever the conversation turned toward family, toward the future, toward anything that required him to picture himself inside this household 5 years from now. Daniel watched him carefully. He said nothing. One evening, Michael came downstairs and sat across from Daniel while he was reading the paper. Just sat, quiet. For a while neither of them spoke. Then Michael said, "Dad, you doing okay?" Daniel looked up. "Why do you ask?" Michael's jaw moved like he was choosing words. "I don't know. You just seem somewhere else lately." Daniel studied his son. This boy, the 17-year-old who sat down unprompted to check on his father, and felt something move through him that he couldn't name and didn't try to. "I'm fine," he said. "You don't need to worry about me." Michael sat there another 20 minutes anyway. When he finally went upstairs, Daniel stared at the empty chair for a long time. He thought, whatever happens next, this boy does not lose a father. That was a decision. Not a plan. Not a strategy. A decision made quietly in a room where nobody else could see it. Thad's final report included something Daniel hadn't anticipated. Recovered messages. Deleted from the hidden account. Pulled back by forensic recovery. Angela and Victor, over the years, had a name for Daniel. The sponsor. One message from Angela. For years ago, the sponsor is asking questions again. I told him he was imagining things. He believes whatever I say. Victor. That's because he's in love with a version of you that doesn't exist. Another. From 2 years ago, the sponsor paid off the Galveston units. Thinks it's going into savings. I told him I'd handle the paperwork. Victor. What would you do without him? Angela. Exactly what I'm already doing with him, just without having to share a house. Daniel read those messages in his truck, alone, for the second time in a month. This time he let himself cry. Not for long. Not loudly. Just briefly. The way a man allows himself a moment when the weight finally exceeds what pride can hold. Then he wiped his face with the back of his hand. Started the engine. Drove home. Because Kofi had a basketball game on Friday. Brianna was coming back from school for the weekend. Michael was probably still awake, doing homework with the desk lamp on and music playing low. Daniel Okafor was not done yet. Not even close. There is a particular kind of man that the world consistently underestimates. Not the loud man. Not the man who flips tables and sends threatening messages and makes his pain everyone else's emergency. That man everyone watches. Everyone prepares for. No. The dangerous man is the quiet one. The one who absorbs a blow, stands back up, straightens his collar, and goes to work. Daniel Okafor was that man. And Angela had no idea. She expected a confrontation. You have to understand that. Angela had spent weeks bracing for it. The moment Daniel would come downstairs with that envelope in his hand and that look on his face, the look that meant the wall had finally come down, she'd rehearsed her responses. She knew which tears to produce and when. She had a story ready about the DNA test. I was scared, Daniel. I panicked. I should have told you. Designed to buy time and sympathy in equal measure. She had a lawyer already on retainer, a woman named Deja Harmon, who operated out of a glass office in the Galleria area and specialized in high-asset divorce cases for clients who wanted to win, not just settle. She was ready for the storm. What she was not ready for was a stillness. Daniel came home from work on Monday evening and asked about her day. He helped Kofi with homework on Tuesday. He brought her coffee on Wednesday morning without being asked, set it on the nightstand, exactly the way she liked it, and walked back downstairs without a word. By Thursday, Angela had convinced herself she was safe, that he hadn't found anything, that the clasp had been shut, and she'd been foolish to worry. She texted Victor. False alarm. He doesn't know. Victor replied with 2 words. Told you. Neither of them considered the third possibility, that Daniel knew everything, and was simply choosing his moment. 3 weeks after the night of the purse, Portia Calloway sat across from Daniel in her Midtown office and laid out what Thad's reports had assembled. She walked through the 5 properties: the LLC, the private account, the 15 years of rent payments, the recovered messages. Then she placed a single sheet of paper in front of him. "This," she said, "is what Angela's attorney is preparing to argue." Daniel read it. Angela's legal strategy was clean, aggressive, and if Daniel had been unprepared, it might have worked. She intended to claim the properties as independently acquired assets, built through her own financial management, separate from marital income. She would argue the LLC was established as a personal investment vehicle, predating any joint financial agreement. She would push for half of Okafor built, citing years of supporting the household that allowed the business to grow. She would seek full control of the properties, financial support, primary custody of the minor children. She also intended, and this was the part Daniel read twice, to raise the DNA results herself. To present Michael's paternity as a disclosure she'd been unable to make due to fear of Daniel's reaction. To position herself as a mother who had protected her child. She was going to use Michael as a shield. Daniel set the paper down. "How long do I have?" he said. "She'll file within the month," Portia said. "We need to move before she does." The next 4 weeks were the most disciplined of Daniel's life. Portia's team filed a series of legal motions that quietly began locking down the assets of Okafor built, restructuring ownership documentation, establishing clear trails of business income separate from marital finances, protecting the company's contracts and accounts from the kind of broad spousal claim Angela's attorney was building toward. Thad handed over every document, every recovered message, every property record, organized into a case file that Portia described as one of the cleaner financial fraud packages I've seen in a family court context. Daniel collected receipts. 15 years of rent payment confirmations stored in his email archive, going back further than Angela probably remembered. Bank transfer records, wire confirmations. Every dollar he had ever moved, traceable, documented, time-stamped. He also did something small that mattered enormously. He texted Victor Reeves. No call, no confrontation, just one message, sent from a number Victor didn't recognize. At 11 p.m. on a Tuesday, "Your son deserves to know who his real father is." He never sent another message. He never needed to. Victor read it at midnight and didn't sleep until dawn. Angela filed on a Tuesday in October. She walked into Daniel's home office, the office in the house she secretly owned, in the home she'd been collecting rent on for 15 years, and placed the divorce papers on his desk with the composure of a woman arriving at a celebration she planned herself. She was wearing the burgundy blazer. Daniel noticed. She always wore that blazer when she wanted to project control. "I think we've both known for a while," she said, voice steady, "that this isn't working anymore." Daniel looked at the papers. Then he picked up a pen and signed. No hesitation. No trembling hand. No questions. Angela stood very still. She had prepared for resistance and received none. She had anticipated grief and found composure. The absence of the reaction she expected knocked something loose in her, just briefly, just for a second, before she gathered herself and picked up the papers. "I'll have Deja reach out to your attorney," she said. "Already handled," Daniel said. He turned back to his desk. She stood there another moment. Then she left. When the door clicked shut behind her, Daniel exhaled once, long and slow, the way a man breathes before lifting something very heavy. Then he called Portia. She filed. "I know," Portia said. "We're ready. Court date is set. Are you?" Daniel looked out the window of his office. The office in the house he'd been paying rent on for 15 years. The house that sat in the middle of the empire his own money had built for someone else. "Yes," he said. Angela spent the weeks before the hearing celebrating. There is no other word for it. She booked a vacation to the Maldives. Departure scheduled for 2 weeks after the expected settlement. She went furniture shopping at a high-end showroom on Post Oak Boulevard and photographed pieces for an apartment she was already mentally decorating. She test drove 2 luxury vehicles at a dealership in the Galleria. She had dinner with her closest friend, a woman named Roxanne, at a restaurant in River Oaks and ordered the tasting menu. Men become blind when they love you, she told Roxanne over dessert. Roxanne laughed and raised her glass. Victor sent a voice note. By this time next month, it's over. You did everything right. Angela listened to it twice. Meanwhile, Daniel was at home, helping Michael prep for his college application essays. He sat at the kitchen table while Michael typed, occasionally suggesting a better word here, a cleaner sentence there. At one point, Michael read a paragraph out loud, and Daniel told him it was the strongest thing he'd written. Michael looked up. You really think so? I know so, Daniel said. You earned every word of that. Michael nodded and went back to typing. Neither of them spoke again for a while. But Michael didn't leave the table. He stayed there, typing, with his father sitting across from him, and the kitchen was quiet in a particular way that only comfortable silences are. The morning of a hearing, Daniel woke at 5 a.m. He made breakfast for Kofi before school. Scrambled eggs, turkey bacon, orange juice. He sat across from his son while he ate and listened to him talk about an upcoming basketball tournament without offering advice unless asked. When Kofi left, the house was still. Daniel dressed in the charcoal suit, the one he wore when he signed his first major construction contract, the one that meant business without announcing it. He drove to Portia's office, reviewed the case file one final time, and arrived at the Harris County Courthouse at 8:45 a.m. Portia walked beside him. How are you feeling? She asked. Like a man who did the work, he said. Angela arrived at 9:05, Deja Harmon at her side, both of them walking with particular confidence of people who believe the outcome is already written. Angela wore a structured navy dress. Professional, sympathetic, carefully chosen. Victor arrived separately. He sat in the back of the courtroom in a gray jacket, looking uncomfortable in the way men look when they've been summoned somewhere they didn't expect to actually have to show up. Michael was brought in by Brianna, who had driven down from Houston for the hearing, not fully understanding what was about to unfold. She sat beside her brother in the gallery. Kofi had been kept home from school. Daniel didn't want him in that room for what was coming. Michael sat straight in his seat, hands folded, watching everything with those careful, guarded eyes. The judge was a woman named the Honorable Cynthia Oduya, sharp, unhurried, the kind of judge who had presided over enough family court proceedings to read a room before anyone had spoken. She looked at both tables. She nodded once. Let's begin. Deja Harmon opened for Angela's side with the rehearsed confidence of someone presenting a story they'd polished for weeks. Independent investment, personal financial initiative, a woman who had built something of her own within a marriage. She was halfway through her second paragraph when Portia stood up. Your Honor, with respect to opposing counsel's framing, we'd like to introduce the financial record. What followed was not dramatic in the way courtroom scenes are dramatic on television. There was no shouting, no gavels. No one leapt to their feet. It was quieter than that, and quieter is always worse. Portia walked the court through the property ownership certificate for the Pearland home. The judge reviewed it without expression. Then the bank statements. 15 years of deposits matching the rent amounts Daniel had been paying, arriving in Angela's private account like a metronome. The judge's pen stopped moving. Then the LLC documentation, the Midtown commercial space, the Missouri City rental, the Third Ward duplex, the Galveston apartment complex. Each one purchased with capital sourced from Okafor Built's income records, each one titled in the LLC name connected directly to Angela. Deja Harmon's composure began developing small cracks, not visible in her face, but in her hands, which had stopped moving. Angela sat very still, the stillness of someone who is concentrating very hard on not showing what they're feeling. Then Portia laid out the rent payment records. 15 years. Every confirmation. Every wire transfer. Every automatic payment. All of it flowing from Daniel's accounts into a property his own wife secretly owned. Mr. Okafor, Portia said clearly, paid rent to his own wife for 15 consecutive years, totaling, she paused a number, approximately $240,000. The courtroom was very quiet. Angela's jaw moved once. That was all. The judge looked over her glasses at Deja Harmon. Counsel, would your client like to respond to the documentation currently before this court? Deja leaned toward Angela and whispered something. Angela shook her head almost imperceptibly. "Will reserve comment, Your Honor," Deja said. The judge wrote something in her notes. Then Portia placed the final document on the table. The DNA paternity report. She didn't announce it dramatically. She didn't perform it. She simply set it down and referenced it in plain, factual language. The date it was conducted, the result, and the timeline establishing that Angela had possessed this information for 16 years without disclosing it. The courtroom shifted, not in noise and atmosphere, the way a room changes temperature before a storm. Michael, sitting in the gallery beside Brianna, leaned forward slightly. Brianna put a hand on his arm. He gently moved aside. He was reading. Even from the gallery, he could see enough of the header, the clinical table, his own name in the subject line, to understand what he was looking at. The understanding arrived at his face, not as explosion, but as collapse. Slow, from the inside out. He turned to look at Angela. Angela was staring at the table in front of her. "Mom." His voice was low, just one word, but the word carried 17 years inside it. She didn't look up. "Mom." The judge looked toward the gallery. "Young man." "What is that?" Michael said. His voice was completely steady. That steadiness was the most heartbreaking thing in the room. "What is that document?" Victor, in the back row, went very still. The judge addressed him directly. "Mr. Reeves, given the nature of the documentation before this court, your presence here is material to these proceedings. Please approach." Victor stood slowly. He walked in front of the courtroom like a man walking somewhere he'd been trying to avoid his entire life. He sat in the chair indicated to him and looked at his hands. The judge reviewed the paternity confirmation. She looked at Victor. "You are aware of this report?" Victor said nothing for a moment. "Mr. Reeves." "Yes," he said, quietly. "And you have been aware since the time of the test?" Another pause. "Yes." Michael's breathing changed. Brianna heard it and moved closer to him. He let her this time. The judge removed her glasses and set them on the bench. She looked at Angela. "Mrs. Okafor." Her voice did not rise. It didn't need to. "You have, according to the evidence before this court, concealed material information regarding the paternity of a minor child for 16 years. You have collected rent from your husband on a property he believed to be independently owned. You have directed marital income into private financial vehicles without disclosure. And you have done all of this while your husband raised a child he understood to be his own, financed an asset portfolio he understood to be jointly held, and paid monthly for a home he believed to be a rental." She paused. "Is there anything your counsel would like to say before I note my assessment of this record?" Deja Harmon sat back in her chair and said nothing. Angela said nothing. The courtroom said nothing. And then Michael stood up. He didn't ask permission. He didn't raise his hand. He just stood, all 6 feet of a 17-year-old frame, and said, "I want to say something." The judge looked at him for a moment, then nodded. Michael walked out of the gallery row. Brianna stood too, instinctively, but he shook his head at her once. She sat back down. He walked to the center of the room. He looked at Victor first. For a long time, Victor met his eyes for about 3 seconds before looking away. Then Michael turned toward Angela. Angela finally looked up. And the thing about that moment, the thing that Daniel would carry with him for the rest of his life, was that Michael didn't look angry. He looked the way a person looks when they've just understood something that changes the entire shape of their memory. Every birthday, every conversation, every time he'd wondered why he didn't quite look like everyone else in his family. Every time something unspoken moved through a room and he couldn't name it. All of it, rearranging itself in real time. He looked at his mother for a long, long moment. Then he turned around. He walked past the table where Victor sat. He walked past Angela's table. He walked to the plaintiff's side and stopped beside Daniel. Daniel looked up at his son. Michael said, "My dad taught me how to ride a bike." His voice didn't shake. "My dad stayed awake all night in a hospital when I was 8 years old. My dad drove me to every single science fair. He looked at my college essays last week and told me the best paragraph I'd written was the one I'd almost deleted." He paused. "You," he said, turning briefly toward Victor. You share my blood. That's biology. That's chemistry. That doesn't make you my father. He looked back at Daniel. This man never left. He never made me feel like a burden. He never made me earn his presence. He just showed up every single time. His voice dropped just slightly on the last sentence. Blood didn't make him my father. He made himself my father. And I'm not going to stand on the other side of this room from him. The courtroom was completely still. Somewhere behind them, Brianna had started crying quietly, her hand pressed over her mouth. Daniel stood up slowly. He put his hand on Michael's shoulder. Michael didn't move away. Victor was asked by the court to formally acknowledge paternity. He did, in a voice just above a whisper. He was also informed that acknowledgement carried legal obligations, financial support, formal documentation. He looked like a man who had just realized that running from something for 16 years only meant arriving at reckoning with more interest attached. Angela's legal strategy collapsed in the same way she'd built it. Quietly, structurally, from the foundation up. The properties purchased with marital income and concealed through an undisclosed LLC were deemed marital assets subject to equitable division. The 15 years of rent payments were documented as fraudulent collection from a spouse. The business protections Portia had established held clean. Okafor built remained Daniels. Deja Harmon spent the rest of the morning trying to negotiate from a position that had no ground left under it. Angela did not look at Daniel once for the remainder of the hearing. She looked at Michael twice. He didn't look back. 6 months later, on a Thursday morning in April, Daniel Okafor opened the doors of new Okafor-built headquarters on the south side of Houston. The building was modest, 2 stories. His company's name on a clean sign above the entrance. Nothing flashy, nothing that needed to announce itself. He designed it with his crew, the same 32 people who'd been with him through the lean years and the difficult ones. His children were there. Brianna stood near the entrance in a blazer, already looking like the attorney she was going to become. Kofi stood 6'2" beside her, hands in his pockets, grinning the wide grin that was entirely Daniel's. Kwame was there, Daniel's brother, and their mother, Pauline, who had driven up from 3rd Ward and cried the moment she pulled into the parking lot. Michael stood beside Daniel at the entrance, holding one end of a red ribbon. A photographer from a local Houston business publication had asked Daniel for a quote that morning. He'd said, "I built things for 22 years for a family I believed in. Turns out I was building for the right family the whole time. I just had to find out which one it was." At 10 a.m., Daniel and Michael cut the ribbon together. The small crowd clapped. Michael looked at his father. Daniel looked at his son. And that was enough. That was more than enough. 3 blocks away, Angela Okafor sat in a car she no longer fully owned, watching nothing in particular. She had her phone in her hand. Victor's contact had been deleted weeks ago. He'd moved back to Dallas and made clear through his attorney that his involvement in Michael's life would be exactly what the court required and nothing beyond. Roxanne hadn't called in 2 months. The Maldives reservation had been canceled. The furniture never delivered. The luxury vehicle back on the lot. She sat there for a long time, not angry, not calculating, just still. And somewhere in that stillness, something shifted. Not remorse, exactly. Something older and harder than remorse. The recognition that arrives when a person finally counts up the full cost of what they chose and realizes that the number they've been imagining was never the real one. She hadn't lost the properties first. She hadn't lost the money first. She lost Daniel's trust first. And everything else fell through that hole. If this story hit you, really hit you, smash that like button right now. Share it with someone who needs to hear it. Subscribe for more stories like this one. And drop in the comments, what was the moment in this story that got you the most? Was it the courtroom? Was it Michael? Was it Daniel cutting that ribbon? Tell me. I want to know. Because this channel is built for people who feel things deeply. And you are exactly that kind of person.